concern is that some of the districts right now are really upset with ARB, and they want representatives to push back on Mary.
Okay. Hello, welcome to the Technology Committee. I believe that the chair may be attempting to get off a plane or on a plane or something. So I will be chairing, and we'll begin with item number 1, the number of contracts, and I think we have a PowerPoint. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. With this item, staff is recommending execution of contracts for this year's Carl Moyer program, SOON program, and AB 134 funding that has been designated for the Carl Moyer program. This item also includes a proposal to transfer funds for the Carl Moyer and Voucher Incentive Program. This year marks the 19th year of the Carl Moyer program. Back in April, the ARB granted SCAQMD about $25.4 million for this year's Carl Moyer program. The required local match from SCAQMD is a minimum of $3.8 million. And to kick off this year's Carl Moyer program, back in April, the SCAQMD released 2 program announcements, one for the Carl Moyer program and one for the SOON program. We received 164 applications requesting over $118 million. This slide shows the amount of project funds that are available for this year's Carl Moyer program. The funding sources include SB 1107, earned interest, and the required match funds by SCAQMD for a total of $27.3 million. For this year's Carl Moyer program, the following selection criteria were used to evaluate, rank, and select projects for consideration by the board. EJ areas pursuant to AB 1390, at least 50% of the program funds must be spent on projects that are located within EJ areas. Next, we also considered all of the on-road projects using zero and near zero emission technologies. With SB 513 and the new 2017 program guidelines, the on-road category was opened up to allow funding for advanced technologies, including the 0.02 gram low NOx engines and zero emission vehicles. These projects will deploy the cleanest technologies available and are expected to encourage more fleets to apply in subsequent years of the program. And a fundamental requirement of the Carl Moyer program is that all projects must meet a minimum cost effectiveness level to qualify for program funding. For each category, the projects were ranked in order of their cost effectiveness and selected based on this ranking.
What is the, if I might, what is the cost effectiveness that's the threshold?
It's currently set at $30,000 per ton, including the 3 pollutants, NOx, PM, and ROG. This slide shows a breakdown of the proposed awards by category. For the on-road category, staff recommends funding all projects that were found to be eligible. This includes 230 vehicles. For the marine and off-road category, staff recommends funding eligible projects located in EJ areas and based on their cost effectiveness ranking. For the SOON program, staff is recommending funding for 6 off-road projects, including the repower or replacement of 29 engines. So the total recommended funding for this year's Carl Moyer program is about $27.4 million. With the proposed awards, the SCAQMD will meet the 50% goal for EJ this year. The criteria used to define an EJ area for the Carl Moyer program includes poverty level and either a high PM 2.5 concentration or a high cancer risk. The SCAQMD is expecting additional new funding for the Carl Moyer program through AB 134. This bill.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
On the EJ, are those special conditions, or does it flow from the from what designation is from the state as whether EJ community?
For the Moyer program, the state relies on the individual air districts to develop their own criteria to identify environmental justice areas. And this was criteria that we developed and have been using under Moyer for many years.
So the current designation that the state has on EJ areas doesn't have any effect.
I think
There's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, the OEHAG guidelines is slightly different, but there's, I think for the most part, we did a comparison, it lines up pretty well. There may be a few zip code blocks where it doesn't, but for the most part, at least in the South Coast, it aligned really well with the OEHAG guidelines. I think there's a lot of disparity in Bay Area and other areas where they define it differently, but ours is pretty aligned.
And then part that's based on property values. So it's, I think, more difficult up in the Bay Area. And their contention is they are very much EJ communities.
Well, all of San Bernardino County is.
Yes, it is. And Syed says all of San Joaquin is too.
Okay. The
No, it's fine.
SCAQMD is expecting additional new funding for Calm Warrior through AB 134. This bill was signed by the governor last month. The bill provides $250 million statewide for the Calm Warrior program, including 43% allocation to the South Coast SCAQMD. This amounts to about $107.5 million. The encumbrance and liquidation deadlines for these funds are identified here. Due to the early encumbrance deadline, staff recommends funding all remaining projects that have been evaluated and deemed eligible. This includes about $32.7 million in Moyer projects and $18.8 million in Soon projects for a total of $51.5 million, approximately. With implementation of this year's Moyer program and Soon programs and the AB 134 funding, the expected benefits are over 560 tons of NOx, 560 tons per year of NOx reductions and 23 tons per year of PM reductions. This slide presents the summary of the proposed awards along with the associated funding source for a grand total of $78.9 million of Moyer eligible projects. This item also involves two actions to transfer funds. The first action is to transfer up to $51.5 million as a temporary loan as needed for the from the AB 923 fund to the Calm Warrior program fund until receipt of the AB 134 revenues from CARD. The second action is to transfer $2 million from the AB 923 fund to the voucher incentive program to allow this program to continue issuing vouchers for truck replacements. In summary, the recommended actions are execute contracts for this year's Calm Warrior program totaling $23.5 million, execute contracts for the Soon program totaling about $3.7 million, and transfer up to $51.5 million as a temporary loan as needed from the Calm Warrior AB 923 fund to the Calm Warrior program fund until revenues are received through AB 134. And also, with that, we would like to recommend execution of contracts for Calm Warrior and Soon eligible projects totaling $51.5 million from the Calm Warrior program fund. And next, we would like to request authorization for the executive officer to redistribute the source of funds between SB 1107, AB 923, and the funds allocated under AB 134 as necessary in order to assure that we're meeting the program encumbrance and expenditure targets. And finally, transfer $2 million from the Calm Warrior AB 923 fund to the voucher incentive program to continue with truck replacement projects. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much.
Question.
Judy.
Of these projects, is any of this money being used to fund the low NOx Cummins Westport truck?
Yes. Yes, it's part of the on-road projects that we received. The majority of them were requesting the 0.02 gram 12-liter trucks, which are not yet available, but will be soon.
So that we've got 230 trucks, I think.
Yeah, 230.
So of those, a substantial number are going for the low NOx?
Yes.
Okay, the reason I was worried about that was you're anxious to spend this money, but I know that truck isn't gonna be commercially available till the spring, but this timing will work.
Yeah, the Moyer program allows 18 months from contract execution, but we have 2 years to expend them, 2 years to contract and 4 years to liquidate. So we have plenty of time with this year's Moyer program.
And then what steps do we take to follow up to make sure that the money is spent as we expect? Well, I mean, when you give the money to the fleet owner or whatever, but we must do some kind of follow-up so we see that they actually
Yeah,
did
through
that.
Project monitoring is done through the contract. They're expected to give us quarterly reports until the equipment's delivered. Once it's in operation, they gotta give us annual reports after that.
And if there is project fall through, we always come back to the committee and to the board to request to execute different contracts under the same guidelines.
I
Further
think
questions from the committee?
Yeah, just building off of Judy's first question about the ultra low NOx engine, I've heard even pushing out as far as the summer, so do we have any idea on when
Yeah.
those are gonna be
So
commercially
we-
available at this
yeah.
point?
We heard, so we checked both with Cummins Westport, the engine manufacturer. They still are on track to certify the engine by the end of the year. They say November, so that's even
Okay, great.
ahead of schedule. There may be some confusion because there's two different models that Freightliner is going to commercialize with the engine. One is the day cab and one is the sleeper cab.
Okay.
So they're saying I think it's the M2 is the day cab. They're going to commercialize that one first. That's spring of 2018. And then summer fall is the one that they think may be in higher demand, which is a sleeper cab, which will be longer haul. So I think that's where there may be some confusion, but for the early adopters, they can certainly get the day cab version sooner.
And I think that when they're talking nationally, not necessarily California, or,
Well, we're talking to Vehicle Velocity Group, which is the local largest Freightliner dealer in California, and they're based here in Southern California, so that's who we've been working with. So I'm not sure if it's going to be a national deployment, but certainly the ones that are here for the ports is going to come through Vehicle Velocity Group.
I was just curious, because the long haul sleeper would make more sense
Right.
nationally, whereas the day cab
Local.
make more sense for drayage, so that's good that they're doing the day cab first, so.
So we can check with Bob Carrick from Freightliner on
Great, okay.
national rollout.
Thanks, I appreciate that. My other question is building off of Mayor McCallan's here. The 30,000 per ton, how is that calculated? Is that over a period of years of ton savings? Because when I look at it in a 1-year period, it looks like it's about 130,000. So, how does that break down?
So each category has some limitations in the guidelines about how long, what's the maximum project life we can use for calculating cost effectiveness. For truck projects, for example, it's limited to 5 years.
Okay.
So they're all evaluated based on what emission reductions they get over that 5-year period. And the dollars is the dollar of grant money from the Carl Moyer program. So if they get any other funding, it's not included in the calculation.
Got it. Okay, the 5-year made total
Right.
sense to me,
Okay.
so just wanted to make sure that the math was working in my head. So, thanks a lot, I appreciate that. And
Any other questions from committee members? Any public testimony on this item? Please come forward. Welcome.
Hi there. Good afternoon, members of the board. I'm Laura Nevin, Environmental Affairs Manager at SoCalGas. And I appreciate Board Member Mitchell and Robinson's comments. Along those same lines, I wanted to make brief comments emphasizing the importance of using the AB 134 GGRF dollars to incentivize the deployment of the near zero heavy duty trucks in the South Coast Air Basin. As this board recognized during the AQMP development and adoption, the single most impactful strategy for reducing mobile source emissions is to prioritize incentivizing the most cost-effective technologies, such as the emerging near-zero heavy-duty trucks. And these next-generation heavy-duty engines reduce NOx by 90%, as you all know, and when paired with renewable gas, they can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 80%. The much-anticipated 12-liter truck, as we were just talking about, will be commercially available in early 2018. Actually, that was a helpful comment that Matt added about the two different engines. I didn't realize that. But we'd like to note that that engine is suitable for a variety of heavy-duty vehicles, and it's in the final stage of CARB certification. With the success that the district had in Sacramento this past legislative session, we now have much needed GGRF dollars. And the imminent availability of the low NOx engine provides the right timing to prioritize funding these emission reductions in the heavy duty truck sector. So the proposed Moyer fund for the proposal includes the 230 on-road engines, which we think is a great start. But the legislature also provided that 40% of the AB 134 funds could be used in accordance with the Prop 1B guidelines. And we strongly encourage the district to maximize the use of GGRF dollars for the precise purpose of funding low NOx trucks and using the Prop 1B flexibility that was in the GGRF funds. So there's a lot of talk about the same pot of money. It's the $107.5 million that the district has. Now 50 million or so is going to be encumbered through the Moyer program, which provides the right timing for the district to use the funds. So we understand that, but I guess there's a lot of questions swirling around about how the rest of that money is going to be utilized. Some of it's been talked about for AB 617, Community Emission Reduction Program. There's a whole lot of talk about how this pot of money is going to be used. We'd like to see it used for heavy duty trucks, which I think is was what the board's direction was, the AQMP adoption. So I just wanted to bring those comments to light and encourage the use for Prop 1B funding as much as possible. Also knowing that there's just a whole lot of talk about how the funds are going to be encumbered for different programs. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other public testimony on this item? Seeing none, committee, there's a number of pieces to this motion, as you saw in the presentation, but we can take them as a whole, I think, including the loan.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Moved
I'll second.
and seconded. Any objection to a unanimous vote from the committee on this? Seeing none, that will be the action. Are we okay?
Yes.
All right, let's move to item 2.
Madam Chair, I need to disclose that although I have no financial interest in this item, I am a member of the Metro Link Board of the Southern California Regional Rail Authority.
Okay, so noted. Thank you for that report. This is, do we have a presentation? We do. Let's begin with that.
Good afternoon. This item is to amend contract for Tier 4 passenger locomotive. We have to execute a contract with Southern California Regional Rail Authority. First project was awarded $52 million to SCRA in 2014 for the replacement of a 20 locomotive, a passenger locomotive to Tier 4 locomotive. The project is on schedule. We have 13 locomotives already delivered, and we have post-inspected. The second project, SCRA submit another proposal under our year 16 Moyer program for the replacement of 17 locomotives and the purchase of 3 new Tier 4 locomotives. So the total project cost is $129 million, and SCRA has requested $58.85 million from SCAQMD. In 2015, our board had approved $22.85 million of the request, $58.85 million from Moyer program AB 923 funds, with a commitment to consider the remaining $36 million over 4 phases. So last year in December, our board approved the first addition of $9 million. So the current award amount is $31.85 million. So this is just a summary of the 2 projects. The first project is the replacement of 20 locomotives. The total project cost is $26 million. We already have awarded them $52 million. The second project is the implementation of a 20 locomotive. The total project cost is $129 million. SCRA had requested $58.85 million. We had awarded them $31.85 million. The project benefits is very cost-effective projects. The with a cost effectiveness of a $15,000 per ton. The emission reduction per for from each locomotive is 20.3 tons a day for NOx and 0.33 tons I'm sorry, 12.3 tons a year for NOx and 0.33 tons a year for PM and 1 tons per year for ROC. 53% of the locomotive operation will be in the EJ area. So the recommended action is to amend contracts with SCRA, adding the $9 million to the $31.85 previous approved in 2015 and 16 for a total of a $40.85 million from Kalamoya Program 8923 funds. I conclude my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the committee?
Just a confirmation that all of those 40 locomotives we're providing are Tier 4.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And the first Tier 4 is in service right now on the San Bernardino line.
Okay. Lucky you.
Well, that's where all these EJ communities are that we're.
Well, that's true. Over 50%.
I had a real quick question myself. I recall from our DC trip that Supervisor Nelson was mentioning something about the delivery of locomotives. I'm not sure if this applied to this or not, but something with the railing and some issues with.
There were some design issues.
That were precluding them from being put in use, and so if there's one on the rail, I would guess that that issue's been resolved.
That
but-
issue's been resolved.
Okay, all right.
Madam Chair, I'll move the recommendation.
I have one question, and we
Oh, I'm
haven't
sorry.
heard a public comment, if there is any.
Oh, I'm
so
sorry,
I'll
yes.
hold that thought. So since we can't commingle our funds with Caltrans funds, is this whole contract in terms of our funding contingent on implementation of all the locomotives that are supposed to be put in service,
So,
being
so,
funded?
so this project, our involvement is only on the replacement part of locomotives. There's total of 20 locomotives, and they have expansion of 3 new purchases. Our involvement will be only co-funding the replacement part, component of this contract.
But there's significant cost share from other
Yes, from
funding
Cal,
sources.
yeah, 50%, 33% from Caltrans, 2%.
So it is contingent upon those funding sources coming to be brought to bear on the whole project.
Okay. Thank you. Any public testimony? Seeing none, I have a motion. Do I have a second? And a second. Is there any objection to unanimous vote on the committee on item 2? Seeing none, that will be the action. All right, let us move then to item 3. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair.
Afternoon.
And good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Adewale Oshinga. The item before you this afternoon is to amend contract for replacement of diesel school bus with electric buses. In 2015, the board awarded 2 contracts for the replacement of 3 diesel school buses with electric buses under the EPA Diesel Emission Reduction Act and the California Air Resources Board grant. 2 of those buses were awarded to Colton Joint Unified School District. The district has successfully completed the replacement of those 2 diesel buses. They've also approached staff with the interest to replace 1 additional diesel school bus. One of those, the remaining school bus was awarded to Los Angeles Unified School District. Unfortunately, the district was unable to provide the necessary cost share at this time to complete or to implement the program. However, because of the district's because the district is committed to electric school bus program, staff continues to work with the district, especially since we just found a recently available fund through the LADWP settlement agreement with SCAQMD to be able to replace 1 or maybe even 2 diesel school buses with electric bus. Finally, in order to meet EPA's deadline, we need to quickly reallocate the unspent EPA funds to for an alternative school bus replacement program. So the proposal before you this afternoon is one to relocate funds originally earmarked to Los Angeles Unified School District, amend the existing contract with cont'd Unified School District by adding one additional diesel school bus, making a total of 3 diesel school buses, and then to increase the previous award of $550,000 by $275,000 for a total contract amount of $825,000. And finally, the staff recommended action is to amend the contract with cont'd Unified School District to add one additional bus and increase previous $550,000 award by $275,000 for a total of $825,000 from Fund 33. Now, I just want to point to the fact that even though on this slide it seems to be okay, I'm not sure if the amount on your slide, it says 820, on your package rather, says, I think it's 823, so I want to stand corrected that that number should be 25,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Judy?
I'm wondering what one school bus costs, one electric bus costs.
It costs right around $370,000 to $400,000.
And do we expect those costs to come down?
Yes. But I think as Mayor McCallum has pointed out numerous times, you know, what's the most bang for your buck in terms of natural gas versus electric. And so since these are really demonstration projects to not only demonstrate the technology, but the potential for the schools to adopt it, for that purpose, we think this is a good use of those funds. But if you're looking at deploying many hundreds, this is probably not the right time to do it until the price does come down to be more on parity with 90% cleaner natural gas. I mean, recall we're also working on different revenue streams for schools. So if there's a school bus that can connect to the grid, they can provide ancillary services perhaps when they're not being used to pick up school children. So there's other technology things that you could potentially do that you can't do with natural gas. But at this time, it's just an expensive, early adopter market. But if Tesla's right, the battery cost will come down.
How does that cost compare with, say, a transit bus? Transit's more expensive.
It's more expensive, but not that far away from that amount. Because the school buses, as you know, has to go through some extra care because of the keys. So that, of course, is an added cost to the total cost of the bus that is not, of course, part of the transit.
We keep hearing 2 to 3x for batteries currently. So 2 to 3 times more expensive than the conventional chassis technology. So, and that's borne out in school bus, transit bus, yard hostler. We're seeing that across the board. It's just that's the cost of current technology.
But there's a corresponding decrease in maintenance costs.
That's right. They should make up some costs in fuel if they do it correctly, if they're charging at the right time, and then lack of wear and tear on the brakes and other moving parts. But whether that payback period is acceptable for the fleet or the school district, that depends on each of the individual fleets. So you want to bring that up, not spread over 15 years. You want it over 5 to 7 years.
Okay, thank you.
What's the expected life of the batteries?
So they're warranting it now. I don't know, what is it, 10 years?
10 years.
With a replacement.
But also it depends on how, of course, you charge the battery, because if you charge the battery, once you've depleted the power or the electrons, then it shortens the life of the battery. So there has to be some amount of training involved here so that you can accomplish the 10 years.
You would think for school buses, since the VMT is not very great, that it could probably last longer than that. So that's also part of the demonstration, to find out what's that wear and tear and how long you could go with that existing battery. Good question.
Other questions from the committee? What's the cost share aspect for the school district?
For the coating, it was about close to about $50,000
For each.
for each bus. For the LAD, Los Angeles Unified School District, it's probably about 100,000. And that's because Coating was able to acquire additional cost share from other sources. Otherwise,
Oh,
they
I
would have been the same. It would have been the same cost share for both of them. And,
So
and,
did
and I'm
LA
sorry.
Unified indicate why they couldn't cost share?
It's just because it wasn't budgeted it wasn't included in their budget this time. And the reason why we had to quickly move and get this reallocated, as I said earlier, is because of the EPA deadline. But as I also stated earlier, we're working with the LA Unified School District because we now have and we hope to be able to pay for the entire cost of the bus. And that we are continually negotiating with both the.
Yeah, so I recall the DERA funds, when we applied, anticipated cost share by the entity. But now we have DWP settlement funds, so which doesn't contemplate that type of cost share, so we're able to try the full amount. So we're looking at shifting, not just taking it from a different pot.
So Colton says, could have saved 50K if I hadn't jumped so fast, right?
Well, if they were in charge of a power plant running diesel, that's from the settlement, and they're potentially looking at running the generators with diesel.
And do you know if they can factor in any fuel savings eventually? I mean, if you look over time, I'm assuming, I don't know where charging stations are for these things, if they're at schools or if the school buses are all concentrated overnight and they charge and then they spread out during the day, which is more likely, right?
On one of the slides that I showed up there, the charging station is actually at the school property.
At the school.
At the school. Well,
Yeah.
there are some cases where they may have to go outside and have a charge, but in those cases are very, very limited. One of the things why it is possible to use electric vehicles because you want, number one, to be captive fleets, which means in that most of the things that you need are located where you are. The charging is also part of that, so infrastructure is actually very critical. In
And an additional expense.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, any public testimony on this item? All right, seeing none, item is moved and seconded. Any objection to a unanimous vote on item 3? Seeing none, that will be the action. Okay, item 4, we get to take in some money
I'm still here.
momentarily.
Good afternoon, afternoon
Oh,
again,
hello.
Madam Chair. And members of the committee. The item before you is to recognize revenue, issue program announcement for heavy-duty diesel truck replacement projects, execute agreement, and reimburse general fund for administrative costs. Air pollution, heavy-duty diesel truck is a major air pollution problem in here at home, but also over in Washington State. As you know, South Coast need to find a way to incentivize, as we've heard earlier this afternoon, to incentivize replacement of diesel trucks with low or near zero emission, preferably natural gas trucks. Current incentive programs, however, requires that these fleets scrap the old diesel trucks with the low or near zero natural gas trucks. If we for a moment think about it, what we're asking these folks to do is to scrap the relatively new trucks, which in most cases is about maybe less than 6 years. And they are still in compliance with both the California Air Resources Board as well as EPA emission standard, 2010 emission standards. That is why it is expected that most of this fleet are not eager to jump into this program. Of course, if we can adequately compensate them for that process. So in the case of Puget Sound actually also needs to accelerate the replacement of the deader, older diesel trucks with relatively new diesel trucks that are still in compliance with EPA standards. The good news for Puget Sound, however, is that the fleets in the jurisdictions are willing to scrap the deader, older diesel trucks for relatively used diesel trucks that are also still in compliance with the EPA regulation. Now, the good news for us, as well as Puget Sound, is that both AQMD and South Coast AQMD, and Puget Sound are regarded as neighbors under the EPA designation, meaning that South Coast is in Region 9, Puget Sound is in Region 10. This relationship creates an environment for both agencies to be able to work to find a remedy to this problem. So for that reason, both the Puget Sound, AQMD, and EPA staffs got together and created a working group. The working group to strategize, to come up with a strategy where these problems can be addressed. The working group consists of those three agencies that I talked about, the AQMD, Puget Sound, and EPA, but also include the California Air Resources Board, Coalition Clean Air Coalition, as well as affected stakeholders. So after, let me say, 3 conference calls and a face-to-face meeting in Portland, the group was able to come up with a recommendation. And the recommendation is to establish or create what I call a truck replacement program. The program was supposed to achieve a couple of things, or at least the mechanism for that process is, one, to replace the 2010 compliance trucks with near zero emission natural gas trucks here in the basin. Second, to transfer the 2010 compliance trucks that was just, or is going to be replaced in South Coast to Washington state fleets, where it will displace the earlier 1995 to 2006 diesel trucks. So in June of this year, staff applied and received a total of $1,050,000 grant under the EPA diesel emission reduction grant to implement this replacement program. So the proposal before you then this afternoon is twofold. One is to recognize fiscal year 2017 EPA DREP funds. Second, to issue a program announcement. The program announcement is supposed to solicit applications for heavy-duty truck replacement trucks. Projects rather. The project entails the following. One, to replace 2012 or newer diesel trucks in the basin with near-zero emission CNG trucks. To transfer that replaced 2012 or newer trucks to be sold to fleets in Washington state to replace or displace the 1995 to 2006 diesel trucks. Now, to incentivize this process, the district will be providing a total of $100,000 per truck to the fleets here per truck. And also to incentivize the fleets in Washington state, we limit the sale of those trucks to $30,000. Now, somebody could ask, why $30,000? I think what we did was we did a quick survey of the market to see what is the average price of these trucks. We found that they range about $40,000 to $45,000. We also did a sample survey of the fleets in Washington state to see whether or not that would be sufficient to get them to the table. And the answer to that was yes, to both questions. So following that, the trucks, of course, with any EPA program, as I said earlier, incentive program, you are required to scrap the old truck. So we have to scrap something somewhere. So that is why we're going to be scrapping the 1995 to 2000 diesel trucks that have been displaced back in Washington State. Now, AQMD doesn't have the jurisdiction, as you know, neither do we have a contract with those folks in Washington State. That is why we have an arrangement with Puget Sound to do that for us. So Puget Sound is going to enter not only an agreement with us, but also an agreement with the police over there to make sure that all of those happen. Now, the mechanism or the dynamics of how this fleet is going to do this is going to be implemented under a legally binding agreement between the two fleets. So the program schedule. Staff anticipates that the committee today will favorably recommend this item to the full board, and we hope that by November 3rd, 2017, this year, the full board will, of course, concur with your recommendation. And then the application date is going to be closed. The application will be closed on February 28th of next year, and staff also anticipates that hopefully by before April 6th of next year, we will have fully executed contract for all the fleets that apply for the program, on that program. So finally, staff recommended actions are: one, to recognize revenue up to $1,050,000 from EPA into Fund 17. Second, to issue the program announcement to solicit proposal for heavy-duty diesel replacement projects in an amount not to exceed $1 million. Third, to authorize the executive officer to execute an agreement with Puget Sound to implement the heavy-duty diesel truck in Washington State. And finally, to reimburse the general fund up to $25,000 from Fund 17 to administer the EPA direct grant here in South Coast. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Judy?
Does this mean that we can get 10 clean trucks?
That's right.
But it is a pilot program because, so they attempted this at the state level with ARB and ag trucks. So when there was it was Prop 1B, wasn't it, for ag trucks? Where San Joaquin said, well, we'll take all the older trucks that you want to scrap and we'll use it in our region. And they never were able to do this three-way trade. So we were involved now with EPA and the West Coast Collaborative because the concept is good, but you need someone that's going to be able to execute. And so Puget Sound Cleaner Agency feels that they can help us broker those deals with those fleets. So this is actually potentially a better way by moving these still relatively newer model year trucks into different regions that aren't suffering the same extreme air pollution problems that we are. So it's really West Coast Collaborative is helping us broker these connections.
So does this have potential for further implementation?
Yeah, we think, in fact, this, because it provides another funding stream, right, to the seller of the older truck. So we think this could work in other areas, like for example, ports, if there's a 2012, 2014 model year trucks. But this is a way to see if it's viable.
And have we placed some requirements on what trucks, what the replacement truck will be in our basin?
The new truck would be in our basin, but the used truck would go to a region that could still use a 0.2 gram engine truck. And then we would take their older truck, model year, whatever.
But the newer truck, it's
The new
0.02.
truck,
Point
will
oh
be,
two.
the 10 new trucks, what are they gonna be?
0.02.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, we don't want to trade a 0.2 for a 0.2.
Right, right.
Any other questions from the committee?
Yeah, so if I'm understanding this correctly, there's a trucking company in the South Coast region that's going to sell the truck for up to $30,000, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and they're gonna receive $100,000 in incentive funding from us to purchase a new truck to replace that. On the other side, we were talking about viability and, how that's worked up in San Joaquin. What's the incentive in Washington State for that trucking company to buy the truck? Are they the ones paying the $30,000 for the truck?
Yeah.
So theoretically, it's the cost differential between the market at $45,000
Right,
and they're capped at $30,000.
Right.
That's right.
exactly.
Okay.
And they get a newer truck.
Okay, and so just to my own personal experience, which, you know, I get to draw from, which I really appreciate being able to share that. You know, I do find a lot of trucks even today, closer to that 2012 range, that are under that 45,000 price. They're getting closer to 30,000. So if they can already buy it for 30,000,
Right.
you know, what's the incentive through this process? And that's going to be what will make this viable or not, is do they see some sort of cost benefit on their side to be a part of this project rather than just buying from the market in general. So, you know, I think looking at that number closely is going to be an important factor. So just wanted to start with that. The second part is I just want to say how very appreciative I am that we have this collaboration going on. And I don't know where this was implemented. I know that, you know, Wayne, just his experience in Region 9, you know, previously as the administrator, and then also working with air districts across the country to try to work on, you know, a consistent voice, a unified voice. I hope that's part of it, but, you know, I have to say I'm very, very impressed by the fact that we're looking at this. I've always had some concerns about how we scrap usable vehicles and we end up with, you know, potential waste issues, whether it's scrap metal that's being recycled or what have you, when there's still some life to this. And, you know, so maybe offline, I'd like to talk also about the 95 to 2006 models. And I know that we've got national EPA issues that have to be dealt with there, but what opportunities might there be in close proximity to us, but outside of EPA's jurisdiction, as an example with Mexico, where our transportation costs are very minimal, but I can only imagine that, you know, San Diego's air quality impacts from northern Mexico and even parts of Arizona might be challenging, and maybe there's an opportunity for that truck to have a third life in an area that affects us in some way. I know our big concern has always been that in scrapping vehicles, we're confident that they're never going to come back into the region. Right. And so, you know, I know that that's the underlying concern, but I just want to, you know, challenge us from that point to even. You've done a fantastic job without a challenge, so now I'm looking at it and saying, you know, maybe we could go even further and look at a third life in Mexico. And I know now international issues, it becomes very, very complex, but I just
I
wanted to
wouldn't say
throw
this
that
is
out there.
not challenging, it's, but it is through the West Coast Collaborative
Sure.
that Wayne started when he was at EPA Region 9, and clearly his older staff, or his staff from back then are the ones that have been pushing and helping us to set up those partnerships, so it's been very helpful.
Yeah, it's really gratifying for me to sort of
Sure.
know that program that we started is still relatively strong. It still has a lot of support nationally and in Congress. And I hadn't really thought about it. I know a while ago when Bob Sawyer was the chair over at ARB, he had asked that we sort of look at Mexico. There's actually a border program, I think now it's well, who knows what it is now. I was going to say it's 2020, but I think it's a new number. But we could actually go to EPA and talk to them about the border program and implementation and expanding that, because certainly within Tijuana and Mexicali, there are things that could be done, but I think we would have to impose certain restrictions like geofencing if the electronics could be applied to that, so that we would be assured that they wouldn't be coming back. I think that would be something that we could do, but we can certainly look into these activities. And, you know, the other nice part about this is that because the Region 9-10 collaborative is so strong, it really sets the model for the other collaboratives within EPA to emulate this. So,
If I may just add one thing, I think there are some gatekeepers that we put into the program. One of them would be the 1995 to 2006. That actually is a requirement from DERA. So
Sure.
we couldn't deviate from there. So there's certain aspect of it, even though this is not something, this is very unique. This has never been done before. So we have to make sure we work within the confinement of that program.
Absolutely. So, well, you know, when we were, you know, selecting the new executive officer, and I read through your resume, I didn't see the word futurist in it, but you might want to include that, because you know, your leadership clearly there at Region 9 is you know, coming full circle to seeing some significant implementation. I'm very impressed.
thank you.
Maybe even have some siblings, and there was a sort of hand-me-down concept.
Yes.
We
This
prefer to
resembles
call
greatly, I think.
we prefer to call it a waterfall.
Any other questions from the committee? Any testimony from the public on this item? All right, seeing none, you saw what the requested actions were. Do I have a motion?
I'll move the item.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any objection to a unanimous vote? Seeing none, item 4 is approved. As to item 5, I don't have a financial interest, but I am required to say for the record that I'm a board member of the LA County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, which is involved in this item. So let us move to item 5.
Okay. The item I'm bringing you here today is to amend our contract to develop and demonstrate our catenary zero emission goods movement project. Back in 2013, the board awarded Siemens Industries a contract to develop their catenary truck system here in California. During the construction of this system, an unidentified pipeline was discovered under the roadway on Alameda Street. And this prevented them from using their underground foundations for the poles that support the lines. So they came up with a design change to put the foundations entirely above ground. So they went ahead and did that, and they went to the city of Carson for permitting. The city of Carson approved it, the design, but they also required them to put in some additional safety barriers. And as you can see in the picture there, that these are quite large blocks of concrete that support the poles. And so the city was very concerned, city engineering was very concerned with cars and trucks coming in contact with those. So they wanted us to put up safety barriers to prevent those injuries from happening. The permits of the redesign of the pole foundation was all approved. Siemens completed the construction of the system at the beginning of this year. Our demonstration has started in July, and the trucks have been running on the system since then, and they will continue through the end of December. Our proposal is to amend that contract with Siemens, add $430,000 to cover part of the cost of the safety features for the foundations. And our recommended action is to authorize the executive officer to amend the contract with Siemens, adding an additional $430,000 to co-fund the safety barriers as part of the development of our catenary system. That's it.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee?
I'm just wondering, you mentioned that this would end in December 2017.
Yes.
What, the whole project ends, or what?
Yes. Well, there was another incident that occurred right at the end of construction. We were notified by SoCalGas that the power supply for the system was over one of their high-pressure pipelines. And so SoCalGas wanted us to cease operations. So we got with them, with SoCalGas and with Siemens. We found out what their problems were. One of them is the encroachment, which is against the CPUC rules for that type of pipeline. And the other concern was that the EMF, the electrical magnetic radiation, could couple into the pipeline and cause a danger to their workers. So we asked the SoCalGas to go ahead and put in some safety measures, which is what they were going to do anyways, on the pipeline to make it safe for their workers and allow us to operate the system for 6 months. Because we figure within 6 months we can get an adequate amount of data from the trucks and the system to help us in determining whether this technology is viable and whether we want to do a phase 2.
So in December, will all of this be dismantled? Or what is?
That'll be determined by, one of the tasks in our contract is to look for additional system, look for owner-operator, look for a business case for continuing on this type of technology. So there are some state agencies that are like CEC and ARB who are interested in this project and this type of technology. So we will get with all our partners and show them the results of our demonstration, our testing, and what the costs are. And if we decide that it is viable, we want to do it, then we will. One of the options is to continue that 1 mile, an additional 4 miles to connect the ports to the rail yards.
Yeah, so can I jump in here? Jill said the,
Correct.
this is probably one of the more complex funding arrangements for a technology demonstration project we've ever had. How many funding partners are there?
I think there's like 5. Yes.
Energy Commission, MTA, SoCalGas.
The China Shipping
China
Fund.
Shipping Settlement Funds, ourselves. And so the part of the project had envisioned as we get closer, as we get more data and information, then the funding, all the stakeholders and funding partners would come together and decide how they want to either continue the project to do additional testing if the information is insufficient, or if there is sufficient information, would then there be a justification for a build out. So, the thought was, should we go from the marine terminal to the railhead? So extend that all along Alameda. And we just don't know yet. We don't have enough information to be able to make that determination. So I think one of the things we're going to be negotiating with Siemens and the other funding partners through the remainder of the fall and the winter is, what's our next step? I think the more likely step is going to be finish this business case. So talking to the folks in Germany was very helpful on our trip last week, or whenever it was, 2 weeks ago.
Last week.
Yeah, about what do they see as a business case? And why is it different from what they're already doing in Germany and Sweden? And why is it less or more viable? And I think the likely outcome will be something of not removing everything, but potentially mothballing it until we can come up with a better, clearer direction on how we utilize the technology. So, there is no, at least from our staff's perspective, there is no January 1st, we got to take everything out. I think that would be a mistake. I think there's a lot more analysis that has to go into it. For example, Southern California Edison is doing an analysis on what the power requirements are. So they'll be able to tell us how many trucks could run on the system per transformer, for example. And we've asked them to look at, well, does it make sense to put DC fast charging at each end rather than do a full build out of a catenary system? So we're looking at what are those options as battery prices start to come down. So I think the technology is moving so rapidly. I think we need to get the data, take a deep breath and do the analysis correctly before we start pulling hardware out.
Okay. Thank you.
So is the stuff in Europe commercially viable, or is it just a test?
They're
The Sweden one is actually in operation.
It's in operation
From the mining to transport.
Right. Yeah, so they have different applications, and at least the photographs we saw from the ones in Europe, they're all in either a deserted Russian air base or out in the, what you would call the green fields of Sweden, right? So they could bore down 40 feet, put the catenary poles in. What was interesting is the Swedish one is in operation. Germany has the test track, but they've commissioned 2 more, which they will be putting out to bid, was my understanding, is to do longer-term demonstrations with potential revenue service. So they're probably ahead of us in that regard, but they're behind us in terms of the complexity. They're not doing it in urban centers. They're not doing it in industrial centers. They're not doing it where there's tons of traffic going up and down the street. So
They were having their catenary system on the right-hand side as opposed into the center median.
Yeah.
And that really wouldn't work in our applications,
Yeah.
whether it was a freeway type application. Because we were talking about the 710 60 route, and what the case would be for that. But even looking at the Alameda corridor aspect, connecting Alameda to 710 at some point, that's, I think we learned so much from the sense of the DC fast charging where you can have certainly the bus do rapid charging in 4 minutes. Could you do something on the heavy duty truck side so that you're alleviating some of the battery load, go with the lighter batteries and then just do the fast charging at certain points?
Well, in SCAG, we've been talking about dedicated truck lanes, and certainly something like this would be the kind of technology that might be useful for that. As long as when you need to get off the dedicated truck lanes, you could convert to natural gas or whatever.
Yeah, and the trucks that we're demonstrating and the trucks that Board Member Mitchell rode in, it could be a variety of architectures, right? So we have pure battery electric, natural gas range extended, diesel hybrid. The ones in Germany were diesel hybrids, where they come on and off the catenary almost seamlessly, and the engine shuts off. So they, it could be different fuels depending on what you're.
And what's the advantage to this kind of system? You don't have to have battery.
You don't have the weight associated with all the battery packs, so that doesn't affect your payload, right? If you have a lot of batteries, you can't haul as much. So the concept, right, you don't have the cost. But what we're finding and what Matt and I have been talking about is we need to do we need to do a better job of sort of showing the technology horizon and where we think the technologies really come into play, because catenary system is something that could be done, but if you're getting lower cost batteries and you can do rapid charging, maybe you don't need the entire catenary system. But what's the time horizon and what's the actual benefit? And that's what Matt was asking for, the business model from the guys at Siemens and at Volvo. And if we have that business understanding, then we can understand what the technology deployment horizon is.
Especially with the 710 discussion, it's a major construction project. Right. So the time horizon is much different than ultra low NOx natural gas engines where you can do today with very little infrastructure, because the private sector will take care of that.
Right, there's so much to it, and this 1 mile sort of test, if we mothball it kind of looks like the bridge to nowhere. In a way, because they built it and now they're not going to use it, and no one wants to use it, and
we do have an agreement with the City of Carson. We have a memorandum of understanding with them that if we decide that we're not going to continue it on, or we're going to continue it on somewhere else, that we would dismantle, and Siemens, it's in Siemens' contract to dismantle that and put the area back to its original.
Pristine, beautiful.
pristine, beautiful Carson. That could be even worse, incidentally. I don't mean
with some
restoration.
trees and
I mean, they put
shrubbery
it up, they tried it for, a month, and they took it down, cost, gabillions of dollars. I don't know, it doesn't look so good. So.
One of the things that we talked about when we were in Europe, we talked about ACEs, the autonomous, the connected, the electric, shared, the shared aspect. And these are all very large projects, right? It's not just an environmental project. It's not just the transportation. It's not just an energy. And so the challenge I think that we tend to have is that we do have blinders for our own respective roles. How can we sort of broaden this so that the larger infrastructure, all of the facets are looked at, much like you were saying earlier when, if you're looking at it from this air aspect, you've got to look at the water and the soil aspect. And we need to look at this from a different perspective, I think, and that is, how can we look at this from the broader transportation perspective as opposed to a source-specific perspective? So it's something that we want to kick around and bring back to all of you in terms of some ideas. Because one of the concepts, one of the things that was said to us constantly was, what does your state transportation agency say about that? Because when we were looking for funding in DC, it was, well, this really probably isn't the right place to do it. You need to look at it here. And it was very frustrating because everybody wanted to put it in their own pot, which had their own limitations. And we're saying, no, break that mold. Let's look at it differently. Here we have an opportunity to really increase our efficiency and combine all those funds. So they were kind of like, oh.
too siloed.
So and what we're finding is that European countries are a lot more collaborative, but among these different, sectors that have to go into a
You think the
project like
United
this.
States of America would be more than
You would
the
think.
European Union.
Right.
Well, and
So-
clearly it's being motivated by their climate change goals at the federal level.
Right.
So we're dependent on really the state for that leadership. And they
But it seems like we really have to follow through. I mean, given the fact that there were difficulties with the stuff beneath the surface, I think we have to follow through just on this one. It also, I think, is instructive because in so many science fiction presentations of 35, 40 years ago, they thought about the energy strips being in the roads.
Right.
And we would all power as we went along. It would just run the car that way. And of course, what we're finding, even all the MTA projects, is that all of the indicators of what runs under the streets are almost all completely wrong.
Right.
You know, they're old, they don't show. I mean, we had such trouble.
Wear and tear.
Pacific Coast Highway is like, who wrote this thing? You know, I mean, there's so much there and nothing is indicated. So, but I think for this one project, personally, I think we should see it through and analyze what
we believe there's still great value in pursuing the project.
The other thing is that the technology is changing so fast.
Yeah.
What's gonna happen with autonomous vehicles? How are those gonna play into this whole picture? So you're looking at improvements in battery technology, you're looking at autonomous vehicles, you're looking at faster charging capability. So it is a bit of a crystal ball look, which way do we go? And we wanna look at all the technologies. I don't think we wanna limit ourselves to anything in particular, so.
Autonomous vehicles, I think, are, the difference between autonomous vehicles and self-driven vehicles is only in essence parking. Because they take up as much room on the road theoretically. I mean, if you have all autonomous vehicles, theoretically, they can, they all start up at the same time instead of people looking at their, their phones. But the interesting thing, I think, is also in land use. Because it's sort of like you whistle for your horse, and it's half a mile away and it comes and gets you.
Right.
And so you don't have to have parking at every house and, every new development. That, I think, is gonna be a big non-AQMD, issue for that as well.
But autonomous vehicles, if they proceed together at a specific interval, and that could be trucks or cars, could reduce congestion and be a more efficient way of moving, particularly with freight. If you can,
Yeah, I just
what do they
wonder
call
if
that?
everybody's
Piggyback.
always gonna have them. I mean, that's the thing.
Piggybacking where they're all in
Backing,
line.
yeah, there's another word for it, I couldn't think of it, but, where they're in line with one another.
Platooning.
Sheila wants to drive her convertible, so.
No matter what.
Yeah. You're not gonna.
Cold dead hand.
But she brings up a very good point. Technology is moving so fast and infrastructure, putting infrastructure in and moves so slow.
Yeah.
As you can, technology may outstrip.
And would it be outdated by the time you get it in?
Absolutely.
That's the.
Yeah, that's why I think a sort of a technology horizon map would be very helpful for us.
But I think the issue of weight is very important in terms of, because that's efficiency too, for how you use energy and how much energy you use. So I think there are certainly experimental ways to do it.
Yeah, so the mining example that Wayne mentioned is what they're using. So it's a captive fleet, and all it does is go back and forth. It takes stuff in the
Same
mine,
routes,
and so we think that's a model that would work on Alameda if you just, all they did was had one fleet, they went up from the marine terminal to the rail hub, and that's all they did. But we need the economics and for Siemens and Volvo and others to tell us what makes sense in terms of how much could they charge per container, what's the cost of their electricity then, and so does it pencil out, or do you need a longer length of track in order to get that payout? So those are the things we were hoping to get from this
There
demonstration.
were two projects in Germany. One was a 4-mile project, which was just back, and both of them just back and forth on the same track, and the other one was a 10-mile project. So obviously there would be some things to be learned from those two.
Okay, any other comments from the committee? Bless you, any public testimony? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve?
We need to approve this.
I'll move the item, move the recommended action.
I'll second.
Okay, moved and seconded for item 5. Any objection to a unanimous vote? Seeing none, that will be the action. Item 6 is a written report, which I think we can simply receive. Do we need an,
It's a pleasure of the committee. We have a presentation, but this is a routine item that we bring before the board. It lays out our research priorities for the upcoming year.
pleasure of the committee? Do you want to hear a presentation? Do we ever want to hear a presentation at 1:20 in the afternoon?
I don't need to hear the presentation personally, but I did have a couple of comments.
Okay, well, I think we'll waive presentation. I hope you didn't stay up all night.
No, I prepared it this morning. So.
Good, glad to hear it. All right, questions, Dwight?
The one thing that's been brought up in this committee a few times, maybe a couple of times, and I think at least once at a board meeting, has been dealing with the second life, third life, end of life of lithium-ion batteries. And I don't know if that's been in previous plans that we've had, and it's just duplication, or if that's something that we need to start looking at. And I felt like it kind of fell into this electric hybrid technology and infrastructure category. I know it's something that that Supervisor Kuehl had brought up maybe 3 or 4 tech meetings ago. So, and I know we're all kind of thinking about that.
So certainly the second use of Nissan Leaf batteries and others is an active market.
Correct.
A couple of months ago, we brought an item to this committee and the full board on the Mobi fast charger concept, where they're using Nissan Leaf use batteries. Yep. They're also looking at those uses for stationary uses as well. On the recycling front, however, complete recycling front, there's a lot of pilot work that's being done at the moment at national laboratories. But as far as a full-blown recycling of lithium-ion batteries in a commercial process, that's still in a very nascent state, unfortunately. And we're monitoring it, and we'll certainly report back to you as we hear more progress.
But we have
in that area.
we have a broad category. It's in our demonstrate alternative energy storage, where we intend to capture that. So it is talking about secondary life for lithium-ion chemistry battery packs. So,
Yep.
It's contemplated, but not laid out with a specific project.
And I looked through that one and was looking for the end of life part to it. So I just wanted to make sure I brought it up. So.
Well, I think given the discussion we had about this sort of hand-me-down nature of, in terms of diesel trucks and electric vehicles, I think it's something we really should look at, because for instance, as the larger light rail fleet electrifies, let's say in LA County and other places, we'll use up those batteries, we'll have to, replace them. But they can be used by some step-down, enterprise that doesn't need quite that much storage, but can store a little less, but, use it as batteries. And I think it's one of the ways that we're going to be able to really deliver electricity in a more secure fashion, just regular electricity, that we get in a room.
Backup generation.
Yeah, when we're gonna have, instead of brownouts and blackouts, we'll have, and having to buy on the spot, in terms of every minute you have to buy electricity as you use it. I think we're gonna be able to use that. That's something we'll wanna know about, I think.
One of the things that we actually talked about, I think it was yesterday, it might have been the day before, was the microgrid demonstrations.
Yes, right.
Both UCI and UC San Diego. And we've actually invited some of the congressional staff to sort of look at that application, sort of see how we could use within the secondary application to take a lot of that load that's currently being shipped out of state,
Right.
put it into those type of batteries and do exactly what you just said.
Well, especially since we're seeing more and more renewable energy being generated.
Right.
And everybody's interested in it, everybody says, oh, here's 1,000 new jobs, let's put all of this, solar panels up. And we put them up and then we're feeding electricity back into the grid and it's quite wonderful, but then we've got even
More
more.
than we need.
So we should, we should be able to
Yeah.
store it. And I don't know how much of that goes to our particular mission. And again, how much of it is sort of extended to other kinds of issues and where we will collaborate because we're developing something, but we may not be the only, it may not only be an air district that would want to utilize it.
So we'll take the action as staff to talk to our colleagues at, all the major OEMs, so Tesla, Nissan, et cetera, to talk about automotive use, but then we'll also talk to our University of California friends on the microgrid, and you just sparked a recollection that EPRI had been working on that too for utility scale, so we'll discuss with them and see if there's a study or something that we should be entertaining.
Yeah, because we're already looking at other uses, sort of smaller step down, the cabin cooling and all the things that we talked about 2 months ago.
That's been one of my concerns when you think about every vehicle being battery powered in the future. And we've got all these batteries, are we creating another environmental problem by
No question.
how do we dispose of these batteries? So reuse of the batteries or something has got to be really a focus.
At some point, we're gonna have to create the infrastructure to actually do the recycling.
That's
I mean,
right.
there's always been the challenge of the lead acid battery recycling facilities.
Right.
Lithium is gonna be a lot more difficult, a lot more difficult.
You just
Damn.
dump it in the landfill.
No, you can't do that.
It's sort of like the problem we created with nuclear energy, where, it was fine, didn't even generate greenhouse gas, such a nice clean way to make energy. Oops, radioactive for 500,000 years,
And I'm not sure anyone is really looking at that right now.
I don't think they
People are looking at it, at reuse of batteries,
Well, reuse, but yeah,
The lithium.
The recycling.
disposal of batteries.
disposal of that. Can they reuse any pieces in the lithium ion, like, don't they use rare earth or something?
Yeah, when we talked to the
Use that.
OEMs before the Volt and the Leaf came out, they had assured us that there would be or soon would develop a market for recycling of the precious metals because it is a commodity, a highly sought after commodity rather than mining out in Argentina or wherever they get the lithium lakes are. So we'll revisit that since it's coming up here.
Right, but there's a real health problem in other countries where people are dismantling these things to get the rare metals and.
I think it's going back to China and India, and I think there's only one real recycling in Vancouver or in Canada somewhere for the lithium batteries.
We'll look into that.
And my only one other comment was just about the natural gas fueling infrastructure updates and how that's been aging. The stations have been built and then very few of them have been upgraded. I know that that's in the plan here. I know our own station is in dire need of it itself. But at the same time, the build out on the CNG, I think is pretty challenging. I don't know that there's necessarily the market for it, but on the LNG side, we'd all agree. So I had a private CNG station that opened up 2 years ago in Lake Forest that's already closed. So, and it was a Titan station, which I think was the initial contractor
That's
that we
the
had
operator
that
here.
got
Yes.
bought out, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So,
Okay, so no action necessary on that report. It is received, which ends our agenda. Is there any public comment on items not on the Technology Committee's agenda? Seeing none? Any other business from the committee? So, leaving? We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Leaving.